Hello, and you are welcome to this week's episode of Indo Politics. I'm Tabitha Monaghan, and this week, on an incredibly quiet political week, I'm joined by my colleague Conal Thomas for the Irish and Sunday Independent. It was so quiet. Nothing was happening this week, right?
Really hoping to come in when I did on Tuesday morning and
Me too.
finally have a quiet week after what
we're being promised is quiet days and weeks after the election, and it just isn't happening.
Suddenly, the most respected cabinet minister resigns.
I will soon be taking up the role of Managing Director and Chief Knowledge Officer of the World Bank Group based in Washington, D.C. I am therefore departing from public life in Ireland.
Paschal Donohoe is gone.
Yeah.
This, I suppose, was not unexpected.
Yeah, I think the message around it was shocked but not surprised. He had been kind of linked with multiple jobs as big banks. The IMF, I think, was one of them recently. So we kind of knew that this was probably in the cards, potentially in this Dáil term.
Yes. And I was speaking to a few people before. It's funny, I spoke to a couple of people in government the weeks beforehand, and this came up.
Oh, right.
This came up.
What was the context for when it came up then?
Well, I raised it with one or two people because there was all that kind of speculation around the general election, whether he'd run, whether he'd not. And then, of course, before that, he had the IMF. And that really kind of set the ball rolling. It was late 2023. So, and anyway, one minister I was actually talking to a couple of weeks ago was saying, they can't see Paschal lasting 5 years. And then speaking to another person, I was kind of saying, I think he'll be, gone in a year or two. I didn't expect it to come when it did.
So early in this Dáil term?
So early in the Dáil term. But then again, not surprised. Job came up, took it. It's a big job. Moves over to the States now. And it was funny just listening to him. We were both in the courtyard of government buildings the other day, and he said, I'm leaving national politics, or I'm leaving public life in Ireland. It just seemed it happened so quickly.
Yeah.
But anyway, but I mean, his legacy will be poured over, I'm sure, for many years to come.
Which you started to do already.
Yeah, I started to do already. Look, I mean, I think the common consensus is that he's one of the most perhaps impactful, important finance ministers we've had of recent times. There's no doubt about that. Paschalnomics has kind of come to define the outlook and our economic policy now for the last decade.
Yeah,
nearly.
prudent Paschal.
And the opposition will obviously charge saying, well, actually, that's all well and good. You've protected the FDI model and you've protected investment, and corporation tax a balloon, but what have we got to show for it when people are in energy arrears and we still have a housing crisis and we're infrastructural constraints and we're lagging behind other European countries in terms of competitiveness? So that was it. And it was funny because I think we were there on Tuesday running around like headless chickens for what felt like maybe it was 10, 12 hours. And you like those days in politics.
You do.
When you're not expecting them, because everything kind of kicks into gear and everyone kind of knows what they're doing, and there's almost a sort of a formula at this point. And I think that was started, I think, to more recently by, when Leo Varadkar stood down, and then Eamon Ryan stood down. Harris ascended obviously to the Taoiseach's office.
There's been big moments like that in the last.
There's been, and in many ways, like the Paschal Donohoe story was kind of already written.
Yeah.
He had delivered his last budget, his 10th budget. By the time the obituaries came, you felt like a lot of them had been written for some time.
Yeah, we knew all of it already. Yeah. There was definitely a big sense, I think, when he was doing his interviews and even in the speech that he gave in the courtyard of government buildings, that he wanted to hang around for the early stages of this Dáil term. Yeah. He was very aware that the Fine Gael parliamentary party was very new. There was a lot of green in that party. We had so many people who decided to step aside from politics and then weren't running. So we have so many new TDs in there. And I think he probably felt, though he was talking about, he wasn't 100% sure if he was going to run in the last general election, that he thought, no, this isn't the time, that I need to still be that kind of senior member of Fine Gael and kind of get the party back into government again, steady the ship a little bit. There was still a lot of uncertainty, economic uncertainty in terms of the tariffs and that. So I think he probably felt a lot of responsibility that he had to stay on. But all well and good. There's a huge gap now that has been left both at government level but also within Fine Gael.
There is, and just take actually to touch on your point there. I mean, I think on the one hand you're right that he felt a certain responsibility, because bear in mind the last fortnight of Fine Gael's general election campaign, when they seemed to be floundering, right? Contender had happened. They brought out the big guns, the big gun being Paschal Donohoe. We saw what was coming down the track with Trump, and he would kind of he effectively scared the bejesus out of the public by saying, here's what's coming, and Fine Gael, you need Fine Gael in the finance brief to be able to navigate this. At the same time, the cynical part of me looks at it and says, well, he was going for a third term as Eurogroup president in July, and he perhaps was unlikely to step down as finance. He had to be a finance minister to get that third term. Whether that impacted how he got the job at the World Bank, I don't know. But you're right in saying that, you know, he wanted to stick around to shepherd through, I suppose, shepherd through the government, bed it in. I mean, I think there's a question mark over whether the coalition has bedded in at all. Anyway, we can touch about what maybe to come over the next 2 years. But, I mean, look, the tariff trade stuff has died down. The country, the economy is still booming. We're nearly at full employment. I think there's going to be big questions for Simon Harris in the finance ministry. And crucially, you know, Paschal Donohoe was that axis. He was that kind of problem solver within the cabinet. He was respected. He was a sounding board. People would listen to his voice at the cabinet table and in cabinet subcommittees. And
he was respected.
He was very respected when big decisions need to be made. I don't think that figure is there anymore.
Okay.
Apart from perhaps Micheál Martin, but Micheál Martin seems to be relishing being the Taoiseach on the world stage, perhaps arguably more than he does sitting around making tough decisions.
Let's talk about the reshuffle that happened with the Fine Gael. Obviously, as you mentioned, Simon Harris gave himself a promotion, and now he's going to be finance minister as well as Tanaiste, which I don't know if we've seen before. So as we were writing,
better man than yourself.
Well, as we, there is the power grab on his part that he was able to hold on to the Tanaiste role, but also become the finance minister as well. There has been that kind of quartet at the top of government with, Taoiseach, Tanaiste, finance and public expenditure. Now that's down to 3. As we were writing, he kind of, not that there was imminent threats to his leadership, any threat at all that might have been even on the horizon or people might have even been thinking about it's very different now, because he is finance and Tanaiste and Fine Gael leader. It's very difficult to kind of get rid of an individual with that many roles, that many senior roles.
And if you consolidate your power in that regard, Paschal Donohoe exiting stage left has consolidated even more, because bear in mind, Paschal Donohoe was always the Taoiseach Fianna Fáil feared the most.
Yeah.
He was, according at least to the most recent Ireland Think Sunday Independent poll, way beyond anyone who might replace Simon Harris at 54%.
And who are the other names? And we have Jennifer McNeill would have been
18%.
Yeah.
And I mean, she has been talked about as the future leader and as the one most likely on Simon Harris's heels. Those aren't encouraging numbers. No. So anyway, what Simon Harris has done is effectively consolidated his power. And as you say, there was no immediate threat. I think that's really important to point out. But that doesn't mean there might not have been in 12 months, 18 months, 24 months towards that handover period when he'll become Taoiseach again. Finance is one of the great offices of state. It is, I mean, you could say it's third only to the Taoiseach and Tanaiste. I would argue it's second only to the Taoiseach.
Yeah, it's very important.
Which, if Simon Harris felt that he wasn't as powerful as Micheál Martin or whatever else, having just been in the Taoiseach's office, he had foreign affairs. He was kind of everywhere during the trade stuff.
And Taoiseach, and was coming towards the Taoiseach's office.
And was coming towards the Taoiseach's office. But I think what would be interesting now is, you're right, it solidified his position as party leader for 2 years. We're looking at 2 years, I think now. We're looking at nearly exactly 2 years until the handover when he will become Taoiseach. And there's a few interesting things, I think, going on. What will happen in late 2027 is Simon Harris will become Taoiseach. We don't know what will happen with Micheál Martin yet.
Yeah.
The broad consensus, we don't think he will become Tanaiste.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah. And that was even being spoken about before the rebels were giving out, and even before Jim Gavin withdrew. There was an idea that would be the natural end to Micheál Martin's leadership of Fianna Fáil, that he mightn't want to go back as Tanaiste.
Yeah, but is this also an opportunity for Simon Harris to effectively audition those who may want to, what will I understand, be public expenditure, because Jack Chambers will then take the finance ministry back and public expenditure. Interestingly, I was positing just during the week, I don't know, I mean, time will tell, but the influence this government has given on the importance of public expenditure, spending and infrastructural constraints,
Yes.
right? They're betting the house on this because they see it as the key to solving the housing crisis, the key to solving so many of the country's problems.
And the key to their party's re-election.
The key to their party's re-election, but also Fine Gael's, because if Fine Gael hold that ministry, they will be the ones to reap the benefit of what will
True.
come down the line.
Yeah.
Whether that's Jennifer Carroll McNeill, possibly Peter Burke, maybe Helen McEntee.
Yeah,
Those are
Paschal Donohoe might be in there.
Possibly. Those are the kind of three names. So yeah, and just to touch on the other, I suppose, the reshuffle you mentioned. So Helen McEntee's now gone to Foreign Affairs and Trade and Defence.
That's a big step for her from education. Like, justice was a really high profile portfolio for her. Education isn't as high profile. Like, it has its moments during the year where, you know, you will hear the education minister, you know, CAO offers places. There's all those kind of key moments, you know, teachers may be going on strike. Foreign Affairs is very different. Defence as well, very different.
There's a lot going on.
A lot.
Absolutely a lot. But I think there's a couple of motivations behind it. One is, well, firstly, she's the deputy party leader. It's a very important front-facing role on the international stage. She obviously has experience as European Affairs Minister previously. And I think as well, it's been suggested that whatever about the consolidation of power on Simon Harris's part, there's also the argument that the Foreign Affairs has gone off the boil a little bit.
Okay.
So we still have the Occupied Territories Bill boiling over. We still have the triple lock on the table. But with the ceasefire in Gaza, that's all that dominated Foreign Affairs for 2 years.
Yeah.
It's not as much on the agenda anymore.
Yeah.
Similarly, the trade issue. Bear in mind, Simon Harris, well, reefed trade from enterprise into the Department of Foreign Affairs.
In this new role.
They don't always make happy bedfellows. Foreign Affairs don't really like being told what to do. The civil servants in Foreign Affairs. He set up the trade forum. I thought he navigated the trade issue quite well, along with Paschal Donohoe and Peter Burke. They had that kind of trifecta.
And we have that framework now.
We have the framework with the EU and the US. So again, the tariff issue isn't it. So it's like Simon Harris has this great knack for timing.
Yeah.
The timing of everything for him is just worked out.
Yeah.
What I think will be interesting is how he balances those demands in the finance brief, because you're always the minister to say no.
Yeah.
You know, along with public expenditure, you're always the minister who has to say you're spending too much or you need to rein in that too much. That's fallen more to public expenditure in recent years, but come budget time, those difficult conversations are going to happen. And Paschal Donohoe, as we know, would never give away much, both
Ever.
in public and in private.
Yeah.
That was his skill.
People described him as kind of like a submarine, that he would go down and you wouldn't hear from him for ages, and then all of a sudden when something's happening he'd pop up again. You'd hear from him. He'd be out everywhere now, in fairness, in and around at budget day, and he would make himself available. But he wasn't one of those ministers who was doing doorsteps all the time. He wasn't out in the courtyard of government buildings making announcements. Only when you had again those set pieces, the summer economic state aid, etc., that you would see him at.
Can
That's very
Simon
different for Simon Harris now.
Simon Harris? I mean, can Simon Harris control himself, do you think?
Yeah. Well, I don't know if I don't know, honestly, because it doesn't seem that finance in that way suits his personality as a politician as much. I'm not sure if that will, but maybe this is just a different approach to finance now, that Paschal Donohoe had one way and Simon Harris just has to find his own way, and that he will be more outspoken. We will hear a lot more about finance. Maybe that's just the way it's going to be. The only thing I would say is that there has to be a level of cautiousness around the rhetoric, you know, and the comments that are made.
Definitely.
You know, for example, he was going on his way, Simon Harris was on his way into cabinet 3 or 4 weeks ago, and he made the comments in relation to migration. You know, that became such a talking point, is particularly with the opposition. He was highly criticised for those comments. I just wonder, those kinds of comments within the context of finance can't really be made, because finance is so serious.
Yeah, it is. And I wonder if previously as Tanaiste, he felt he could be more outspoken on issues because, you know, foreign affairs and trade often looked after itself, right? So how does he navigate that now in finance when you're making these really important economic decisions and these decisions around tax, the last thing you want to happen is to say something, something will be cut ahead of the budget and have to reverse that, or the money's not there. In saying that, knowing what I know about officials in finance, I think what we're going to see is a continuity of service here. I don't think you're going to see any ripping up the playbook. I think there'll probably be individual Fine Gael asks and things that were in their manifesto that they'll want to follow through on.
Yeah.
Paschal Donohoe was largely doing that anyway.
And we did hear that from the Tanaiste when he was speaking to Dáil on the Tuesday when the reshuffle happened, that there will be a continuity, that there isn't going to be this mad policy change, that it'll kind of be, well, we'll see if it's going to be business as usual.
Yeah, is there also an element of, how many ministries has Simon Harris been in now?
Oh, God.
There's an experience obviously building up there all the time, going from finance into the Taoiseach's office, so you can see.
And that was the argument put to me anyway, as why he took on the finance portfolio, was that, in terms of the availability of who the ministers could have potentially taken that on, he's the one with the most cabinet experience. But do you think he's up for the job?
Well, time will tell. But I think so much of finance policy is set. It's set, the direction's set. There are big decisions to be made. There's the future of the OECD tax deal. There's going to be decisions around inheritance tax. There's going to be further questions around the volatility of corporation tax, whether the government needs to go further, maybe needs to put more into the two saving funds. There's the sale of PTSB. There's all of this on his plate. Yeah. There's the bankers' bonuses, all of this. So, but what I think would be interesting, and just an anecdote actually about Paschal Donohoe was, and it'll be interesting around budget time to see how Simon Harris conducts those negotiations. Because I remember,
it can be tense and fraught.
100%. If even just talking to ministers now, the last one, particularly on the Department of Public Expenditure side around Jack Chambers, nobody was happy with Jack Chambers. Yeah. Not even those in his own party. But I remember talking to a minister in the former government, and they had this anecdote about Paschal Donohoe, that because he was so professional, collegiate and positive and optimistic, you'd go into a budget bilateral with them, and you go in there with your asks, your billions and billions of asks, and you'd sit there for an hour or 2 hours going over all the officials, and you thought, this is going great, I'm making good progress, and they came out of the room going, I got absolutely nowhere there, because of the way Paschal Donohoe would
delivers it
circular manner around people. I don't think Simon Harris necessarily has that noose. I think he'll be far more to the point and blunt. Yeah. But I think he'll know exactly what to do. Yeah,
quick word on the by-election now, because obviously now there's a second one in Dublin Central. Well, you and I are familiar with that constituency. So how do you see that playing out? We've seen all the parties, most of the parties anyway, saying that they're going to run a candidate. We've no sign of a Left Alliance candidate, that there would be a United Left candidate. I don't know if that might have been too much to ask for from the left. Like they were never really pushing for that. It was just, let's work together. We only ever really anticipated a transfer left kind of a pact. I don't know if an individual Left Alliance candidate was ever going to really happen.
Well, how do you see it going? Is it the left's to lose?
I think so. I do think it's the left's to lose, but purely, I think, based on the fact that it's a by-election, and we know how by-elections go. They're used by voters, by the public, to punish the government. And there was only, speaking to people who are very familiar with the constituency, there's only ever been one, since 2011 anyway, there's only ever been one government seat, or Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael seat, and that's always been held by Paschal Donohoe. Now, some people have made the argument that now that Paschal Donohoe is gone, potentially Mary Fitzpatrick could benefit from that, because she's been around a long time, she's from the area, and because Paschal's no longer there, he always, I think in recent years, needed her transfers to be able to get across the line. Now that he's gone, will she benefit from that? The only problem is that this is a by-election, so it's a very different dynamic. So potentially, maybe in the next general election, she might benefit from that.
Well, if she runs in this and then runs in the next general, that's the seventh time.
No, that's true. That's absolutely true. So yes, a massive if, but it's just the dynamic of the by-election. I'm not sure.
The bar is so high.
The bar is so high. Now, I think part of the question is how much of that seat was a Paschal Donohoe seat, and how much of that seat was a Fine Gael, potentially Fianna Fáil seat to be gained there. But there's a lot of, I think the argument again is that in by-elections, the person who wins is the person who has been on the ground and is most familiar to a constituent, not necessarily a party or, a figurehead that they go, oh yeah, okay. There's an awful lot more to just that. There's also the idea of maybe Gerry Hutch who might run again. He hasn't ruled himself out. We've seen other newspapers reporting that he is seriously considering whether or not he will run or not. Regardless, I think there is going to be a candidate, an anti-establishment candidate within the constituency who's going to run. Again, because it's a by-election and there's only one seat, transfers are crucial to absolutely everybody. I don't know if an anti-establishment candidate, Gerry Hutch or not, will benefit from that.
Possibly. I think Galway West is Sinn Féin's to lose.
Yeah.
And I don't think the government parties have much of a hope there.
Yeah.
Dublin Central is a bit more interesting. And I think maybe it's just because I lived around, we both live around the area. I have noticed more and more the last couple of years, Paschal Donohoe almost sort of bringing Ray McAdam, who's the Fine Gael Lord Mayor, behind him, get much more of a profile. In fact, he would have referenced him and name checked him a couple of times towards the general election last time. And I kind of thought, well, there's a clear plan here, and that had been in the works.
He's current Lord Mayor.
Lord Mayor, and he's been a councillor for many years down in that area, but not really Cabra Glasnevin,
which is a crucial part of that constituency. Yeah, sorry, go on.
And which is kind of Mary Fitzpatrick.
It is,
home turf.
I think she grew up in Cabra.
Yeah. But I wonder about the left. I mean, when I say the left, I mean, the Connolly supporting parties of, Labour, the Greens, the Sinn Féin, and the Soc Dems. And I don't think any of them have a candidate in that area that now, could really capture people's imagination, which has, led to this debate of a united left candidate. I don't think that's going to happen.
Yeah.
You've Cat O'Driscoll, the Social Democrats councillor, Labour,
Don't have a
unclear.
councillor.
Felgen Jose and Janet Horner, the Greens.
Yeah.
Felgen would have topped the poll in the locals.
Yeah, in Cabra Glasnevin, yeah.
And then
Daniel Ennis in Social Democrats as well.
Social Democrats as well. And you've Janice Boylan,
who was Mary Lou MacDonald's running mate, didn't do
not at all,
very
kind
well
of
in the
crashed
last
really
election.
completely.
Yeah.
So I mean, there's always the risk of coming out early, like Catherine Connolly did in the presidential, and that's sinking you. It didn't for Catherine Connolly. Very different, obviously, in a by-election. So let's keep an eye on obviously who declares. I think a lot of people will be keen to go for it, but then you're talking about the anti-establishment or the anti-government candidate. We were talking about this yesterday. The Dublin Central was the 7th highest of the 43 constituencies for spoiled votes in the presidential. Look, a lot of people we've spoken to, I think, would say, look, that's not going to...
Well, it's different. It's a different dynamic, isn't it? Because I think a lot of what we saw in the presidential election was anger at the fact that there was only 2 candidates, and there was plenty of people out there who felt like there was plenty of people who were maybe anti-establishment and weren't happy with how things were going, but there was also people who just weren't happy that there was only 2 candidates and they didn't feel like there was any option. We know at this stage already, we know that many parties are going to be offering a candidate. Surely there's going to be a number of independents, at least maybe 1 or 2 independents that are going to go forward as well. So options isn't going to be the problem with this one at all. I think, and if somebody is not happy with the government, they will have either opposition or an anti-establishment candidate to be able to give their number 1 vote to.
Yeah, I mean, the government's, obviously it's looking likely that this will be sort of May, right?
Yeah, I would think
late May, right? That's the summer.
It has to be within 6 months.
Winter, energy bills, a really disappointing budget maybe out of people's minds, better weather, all of that, that will help the government. Will they win Dublin Central? It's going to be really tough because, as you say, fundamentally that's a Paschal Donohoe seat. It's not a Fine Gael seat. And interestingly, I would, if Paschal Donohoe could be here and campaign on behalf of Fine Gael and Ray McAdam, if he runs, by the way, he's not necessarily choosing, that would help make a big difference. But he's not going to be able to as MD of the World Bank.
Yeah, it's a very different dynamic. Let's talk briefly about Ivan Yates. He was before the Oireachtas Media Committee on Wednesday. I watched a good chunk of it. Obviously he was there to talk about, media regulation off the back of the revelations in the Irish Independent that he coached Jim Gavin during the presidential election. I don't know if we learned a huge amount from Ivan's contributions. I think we kind of knew that he was going to come in. He wasn't going to talk about his clients because of confidentiality. We knew that he wasn't apologetic and he didn't think that there was a conflict of interest. We knew his position already. He did have regrets. He had one anyway, and that was the smear the bejesus comment. Not that he apologised for it, but that he argued that the Catherine Connolly campaign weaponised and deliberately manipulated it. I don't know about those sentiments, but like the Catherine Connolly campaign definitely capitalised on it.
Yeah, and then Fine Gael were really
Scrambling.
forced to reject that, and you'd Micheál Carrigy saying he agreed with Ivan Yates that the Connolly camp weaponised it, and Ivan Yates having to say, what was it? I haven't basically spoken to Fine Gael since 2009, and we've been at odds ever since. He also said, I'm not going to comment on Jim Gavin's performance in the presidential election, but also I have a book out and I might allude to it in that. I mean, how did you think he got on? Because it seems to me he did what Ivan Yates does best. He blustered his way through it.
Absolutely. And I think that's exactly how I would think of it as well, that I think he was a great advertisement for his own media training in that moment, that he was able to easily and fairly effortlessly navigate those questions. I mean, because he knew his position and he stuck to it the entire time. What else did he say? He said that he didn't tell Matt, he deliberately didn't tell Matt Cooper, the co-presenter on The Path to Power, about the training because he didn't want to put Matt in a difficult position. And then there was a lot of conversation around the regulation of podcasts as well, which I thought was interesting. But it's one of those things that I don't know if two things. I think it's difficult to regulate podcasts because, as in fairness, Ivan Yates argued, a lot of people in Ireland will listen to Irish podcasts, but they'll also listen to international podcasts. And then that means that the regulations are going to be different. So how do you kind of square that circle? But also, it's so big, the podcast world. And it's very much like regulating social media in a way, that there's just so many. Everybody has it. How do you kind of reel that back in again? So an interesting conversation.
Yeah, and he kind of seemed to imply that people are completely disillusioned with the mainstream media and have turned to podcasts. But in a way, that's kind of like the Wild West of regulation, isn't it?
Yeah, and that's the phrase that we always use, even with social media, the Wild West of regulation.
Yeah.
What he did say about, and I don't know if I fully agree with him on this, that if people are forced to declare their interests, let's say on radio, then it'll just be a load of journalists talking to journalists. Like, I mean, I don't know if that's true, because we do have plenty of people who are brought in as experts. You might have somebody from the construction industry, for example, or in healthcare, and they're able to offer their insights as people who have an interest in the game. Like that's never been the case.
It is a bit of a can of worms, though, this stuff, really, because Ireland's so small and everyone is so connected and interconnected. And what was it Ivan Yates said at the start of committee? If he was to disclose this, it would be a complete mood killer. If it was disclose all my interest with Fianna Fáil, it'd be a complete mood killer. What was interesting as well, though, is you heard Cumashin Naman earlier in the day kind of defend where they're at with podcasts, because RT and TG have to, but as you say, it is this kind of, Wild West. I mean, this was a bit like some of this stuff with these Oireachtas committees, like with Ivan Yates. It's popcorn, it's blockbuster, but it's very kind of as.
What did we get?
Is there an element of truth to what he's saying around it being a media bubble?
Possibly. Yeah.
How much do the public care? How much they know? How much are they engaged?
Yeah, but I think the fair argument was made that, him saying it would be a mood killer if everybody had to declare it. Well, like sometimes, especially when it comes to politics and it comes to current affairs, it isn't always entertainment. I understand from his point of view, he thinks it should be, a podcast should be entertainment, but not every time. Like people will tune in to a podcast or a radio program or a TV program that is news and current affairs, so they are kind of kept abreast of what's going on. It doesn't, just because it is a mood killer doesn't mean that it shouldn't be done.
No, agree.
It's not right.
Do you think he's being irresponsible and brash in his outlook?
Yeah. What about the Public Accounts Committee? We had Peter McVerry Trust, and I want to bring this up because you have history with this story in relation to the financial crisis that the Peter McVerry Trust found itself in. We had the former CEO, Francis Doherty, who took over, I think, in 2023, but he wasn't there for the entirety of 2023. He resigned kind of off the back of the financial crisis that was emerging when he took over. There were some interesting bits and pieces. Obviously, the McVerry Trust got the 15 million euro bailout because they were suffering so much that they had €437 in all their bank accounts, €125 in a sinking fund, millions owed to banks' revenue and to creditors, trade creditors as well.
Incredible.
But some of the things that came up was €300,000 spent on a driveway in a period property that they owned in Kildare, and that they had built an unauthorised lift shaft and a peacock enclosure.
Why peacocks?
I think the argument that was made by the current CEO,
I don't think I'd ever say why peacocks on the podcast,
On
but please
political
go on.
the argument that was made by the current CEO of the Peter McVerry Trust at the Public Accounts Committee was that when people have been through trauma, that there is knowledge around them spending time with animals and kind of therapy
Right.
around animals. So they didn't just have peacocks, they had ducks and they had pigs as well. There were maybe some other.
Right.
But that I think when the new Peter McVerry Trust regime came in, they realised that these animals weren't being used for the intended reason. They weren't really used at all.
Emotional support peacock.
Exactly. You can call that
How
on
much
the
did the
spot.
peacocks cost?
Don't know. Didn't hear that.
Yeah. Well, anyway, look,
today.
this whole saga has just been going on since August 2023 when that story first broke around dire financial straits. And what was interesting that the charity came out immediately and kind of said, "We're okay, don't worry." And my God, how soon things unfolded. And I remember speaking to Father Peter McVerry himself, and he would defend at the time, "No, our financials are fine." And here we are, over 2 years later, they've had a €15 million bailout. And did you get any sense at the PAC today that the charity is in a better place than when it was 2 years ago?
I think they're getting there is the point, is that it's still a work in progress. They had to obviously give the annual report that was overdue. I think the point is that everybody's just trying to get to grips with the deepness of the financial crisis that they were in. And even
Incredible.
I think the most interesting comments came from Francis Doherty when he said when he took over, he was told that the finances couldn't be in a healthier position. And actually, he said within weeks, he realised that wasn't the case. So it was just, I obviously, just to explain to people why they got into that, as Francis said himself, they were hemorrhaging cash, was because they were bidding for these homeless services, but they were vastly underbidding, consistently underbidding, and that when they got the services, obviously because they were the cheapest of the bidders, that they weren't able to run them with the money that they were getting for it, and that's essentially what happened over years.
And they also expanded massively into the AHB sphere as well, and they just expanded and borrowed more and more and more until the bubble burst and the bottom fell out. And here we are over 2 years later, and they're still having to be hauled in before the Public Accounts Committee.
Talking about peacocks. Yeah, I think we'll leave it there, Conal. Thank you very much for joining me. And thank you for watching and listening to this week's episode of Indo Politics. I'm Tabitha Monaghan, and of course we will be back next week with another episode that you will be able to find on the Irish Independent's YouTube channel or wherever you get your podcasts.